Good morning and happy Mothering Day to all of you. Welcome to Beacon, a Unitarian Universalist congregation committed to radical inclusion, feeding the human spirit, and healing the world. I'm Carol Conger-Miller. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I have the honor of serving on the Beacon's Board of Trustees and also on the Widening the Circle Committee. And I have a warm welcome to all of you, even though the windows are open here. I hope you're staying warm. And for those of you who are joining us online, and welcome those of you joining online and those of you here in person in Summit on the land of the Lenni Lenape. And also a warm welcome to any of you who are new to the community. You may have questions. You can see me at the welcome table, and I'll answer any questions you may have. I'll try to, about the building campaign or what's going on in the board or widening the circle. And let's see, and for all of you gathered here, we ask you to keep your masks on, to keep your mouth and nose covered at all time, so we can all keep you safe. So thank you and welcome.
Say, let beauty in.
Let beauty in.
Let beauty in like waves lapping on the shore, covering the beach with foamy glee and soaking the sand like an embrace.
Let beauty in.
Let beauty in like the first sunshine after a cloudy day, filling hearts and homes with a radiance that brings delight.
Let beauty in.
Let beauty in like a wrapped gift from the spirit of life herself. May the sacred pulse within this space as we welcome in beauty.
Today we have two stories to share with you, both about very real, though very anonymous persons who changed the trajectory of two other people, that of John Murray and the Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis. We begin with John Murray. When John boarded a ship bound for America in the summer of 1770, he was determined to leave his misery in England behind. Aboard the ship called the Hand in the Hand, you might have heard about it here in this sanctuary, out upon the open water, he experienced his first glimpses of relief. The fresh air felt good. The daily working routine invigorated him. The laughter and camaraderie of the crew rekindled his sense of belonging. He could feel life returning. That is, until the Hand in the Hand got stuck on a sandbar off the coast of New Jersey. Maybe you've heard about this, yes? John Murray couldn't even run away properly. Had God's punishment followed him all the way across the ocean? I should have never listened to that woman, John thought to himself as he stared down into the water and the unyielding powers below that were preventing the Hand in the Hand from making it to New York City. The features of that woman's face still appeared to him. He had forgotten her name, but he couldn't forget her face and the conversation that they had had. It kept returning to him. When he had met that woman, John had been a passionate Methodist preacher. In 1760, he had journeyed to London from Ireland in order to be a part of George Whitefield's congregation. It was called the London Tabernacle, and it was the heart of the evangelical revival that was sweeping across Britain. George Whitefield preached a stirring message about human depravity, and alongside Christ's saving message, saving a chosen few from eternal damnation. It was a theological lens that John was very used to, having grown up with an Anglican father and a Presbyterian mother, both strict Calvinists, and so he could not wait to be a part of this congregation. When he arrived, John heard stories, however, from fellow parishioners about a young woman who had left the tabernacle. Why would she leave? She was greatly respected among the fellow members. Yet she had left the tabernacle because they heard rumors that she had started attending James Relly's congregation. Like John Murray and the anonymous woman, James Relly had been a member of the London Tabernacle. He had even been a minister. However, a growing doubt had seized him. If God was loving, as George Whitefield said, how could he damn his own creation? Relly's conception became universal salvation, and it had ensnared this pious young woman, and she had left the true faith in order to join him. John Murray was certain, however, that if he visited her and spoke to her, he could change her mind and heart. And so he and a group from the tabernacle called upon her. It had not gone as planned. John had imagined that the woman would be moved by his words, but instead it was she who stirred him. She answered all of his questions and asked him a few more, and John stumbled to summon a counter-argument, and he ended up leaving the house embarrassed. From this moment forward, he thought to himself, promising himself, I will avoid Universalists at all costs, and I will remove this woman from my memory. He was afraid. He did not want to be tempted. Nevertheless, he ended up buying James Relly's book, and he read it. Not once, but several times. He also then started attending James Relly's congregation, not once, but several times, until suddenly he found himself being a Universalist disciple. And that's when it all went wrong. While John believed that he had found a religion of love and belonging, his family, his friends, his community saw otherwise. They cast him out, thinking that he had gone suddenly wrong. And that's when tragedy struck. His wife died, his 1-year-old son died, 4 of his siblings had died, and he felt like God was punishing him. Where's God's love now when I need it the most, he thought. And so, cast out of these circles of belonging, the isolation that he experienced led him to consider desperate measures. It led him to America, getting on that boat and leaving the misery behind. He thought he could also leave behind Universalism, but he was now stuck on a sandbar, and that sandbar would lead him to Thomas Potter, and Thomas Potter would lead him to a chapel in which John Murray would preach the first Universalist sermon in America. So we know the names of John Murray and George Whitefield and James Relly and Thomas Potter. We know the name of the ship he traveled on. We know the name of the town he landed in. What remains anonymous? The name of the woman who John Murray visited that day. When we tell John Murray's story, which we do each year, we don't even tell her part in the story. But let's be clear, beloved, it was she, the anonymous one, who led John Murray down the path to Universalism. Where would we be without her? And so today, we celebrate the anonymous.
For our meditation this morning, we begin from a place of grounding and centering, noticing where we are seated, how we are seated, straightening our backs perhaps a little bit, resting our eyes, closing them, or gazing at a soft spot in front of us, letting the jaw go slack, letting the belly spill over, not holding on so tightly, just relaxing into this state of meditation and reflection. And from this relaxed posture, we invite in the times that we have experienced in our life when we have felt unnamed, unseen, anonymous. We hold those experiences with gentleness and care, and then we let them go as we breathe in and out. Widening our circle of awareness now to invite in people, places, experiences, images of the unnamed, of the anonymous. And we know that they have had an impact on our lives. Perhaps there was a school crossing guard when you were growing up whose name you did not know. Perhaps there was an assistant teacher in one of your college classes whose name you did not know. Perhaps in elementary school, there was a person on the playground whose name you did not know, the anonymous. All these people and places we hold in our heart with gentleness and care, acknowledging that they had an impact on our lives, even though we do not know their name. Breathing in, we see them. Breathing out, we remain grounded. Breathing in, we know that there will be many more to come whose names we will not know. Breathing out, we are centered. Breathing in, we know that naming is important. Breathing out, we commit to making the anonymous named. Staying present to our bodies, staying present to our sensations, staying present and aware of all that holds us. You are invited now, if your eyes were closed, to gently open them. If they were already open, to lengthen your breath, breathing in and out, gently returning to the present moment, and practicing throughout the day, moment to moment, continuity of awareness. Here ends our meditation for this morning.
Good morning, Beacon. We welcome you to our candle lighting ritual. We light candles to honor all that is good in our lives, the people we care for, and the causes we support. Let us begin by placing our hands on our heart. Feel the beating of your heart in our collective presence. Feel connected to each member of our community, some of whom are in the summit area, and some of us who are many miles away. If there's struggle in your heart, we invite you to share your struggle by putting a heart emoji in the chat. Lift up in the chat the name of a person or place that is struggling so that we can hold them together. Chaplains extend the spiritual care of our community. One ritual of spiritual care is our community candle lighting. Together we light candles of joy, sorrow, and of gratitude. This morning we light a candle for women's reproductive rights. For those who need an abortion, it is still legal. And when it is no longer legal, there is a wide network of people who will help you get the care you need. Let's light a candle of joy for new faces and new connections that occur when we come together. Let us light a candle of sorrow for all of us who are struggling, knowing that all of us know struggle throughout our lives. A candle of thanksgiving on this Mother's Day for all who have parented us into being, and a candle for Carol Satchel, whose husband, Jean Duran, has been hospitalized. For this and so much more, we give thanks.
I will remember you. Will you remember me? Don't let your life pass you by. Weep not. I'm so tired I can't sleep, standing on the edge of something much too deep. It's funny how we feel so much, but we cannot say a word. We are screaming inside, oh, we can't be heard. I will remember you. Will you remember me? Don't let your life pass you by. Weep not for the memories. So afraid to love you, more afraid to lose. I'm clinging to a past that doesn't let me choose. Where once there was a darkness, a deep and endless night. You gave me everything you had, oh, you gave me life. I will remember you. Will you remember me? Don't let your life pass you by. Weep not for the memories. Weep not for the memories.
Good morning. I'm Barbara Heisler, a longtime member of the Beacon Unitarian Universalist Congregation in Summit, and currently the acting director at Murray Grove Retreat and Renewal Center, which is where I'm visiting today. Not too long ago, Universalists visiting the site of Potter and Murray's meeting and the site of John Murray's sermon found neither the land nor the chapel any longer in Universalist hands. In the 1830s, a group led by the Reverend Abel C. Thomas made a pilgrimage to Good Luck, New Jersey, now Lenoka Harbor, Lacey Township, New Jersey, and in 1836 raised a stone over Thomas Potter's grave. By now well organized, the Universalists tried to purchase the site from the Methodists. Unsuccessful, they then brought what they called the Memorial Acre, adjacent to the original site. And this was the kernel around which Murray Grove was formed. Piece by piece, more property was purchased to commemorate Murray and Potter and for the use of Universalist pilgrimages. In time, a church was built, the Potter Memorial Church, also then known as the Little Red Brick Church. It was dedicated in 1885, and the Murray Grove Association was organized in 1886. It was incorporated in 1891 as a guiding body for Murray Grove. On this site of the first Universalist sermon to be delivered on this continent, Murray Grove today is dedicated to building a future of justice and kindness for all. We are dedicated to universal love, honoring the inherent dignity and interdependent unity of life. We practice radical hospitality, creating a sanctuary where mutual respect is fundamental and where people are welcome and cared for, discover and reveal the promise they carry from within, and bring their differences and gifts to co-create a safe space for deep personal and collective learning, broad reflection, and renewed commitment. We form inclusive community, welcoming all who are respectful of others and reaching out to groups that are marginalized by our culture. We promote lifelong learning, spiritual deepening, and prophetic transformation. We try to cultivate transformation and spiritual development through our programs, inspiring and encouraging people to work through their lives with courage and love to make the world a better place. And on this property, we have a reverence for life and the natural world, respecting and caring for the natural world and affirming the inspiration humans derive from it. Through our camps, retreats, and other programs designed to connect, we aim to create a ripple in this big ocean of community. And we know, especially now, we need it. Our impact is enlarging as we create more original programming, plan a garden on our property to address food insecurity, open our grounds for young students to learn the history of this land, even before Thomas Potter, and the history of Universalism, and more. And today, our entire board is on site to interview candidates to become the next executive leader of Murray Grove. We invite you to visit, and today we invite you to support our mission of radical hospitality and become part of making that mission travel. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your consideration of support for Murray Grove.
Today's reading is from the Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis and her book, Fierce Love. Just a few months into our marriage, Paul and I were enjoying a beautiful drive in one of those late September days. We were driving from our home in Rochester, New York, to Louisville, Kentucky, for a cousin's wedding. The trip would take us close to the Canadian border. It happened so fast. The spinning, turning, twisting, tumbling, each moment etched like a frame on film. The car flip-flopped 3 times. We were miraculously still alive. I was bleeding from minor cuts, but Paul's hand had been dragged along the gravel and was badly abraded. Paul would be held in the hospital overnight. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do, but right then, I had to do something. If I could get through the night alone, I could take care of us. Reviewing the plan that I made, I suddenly felt as if my knees couldn't support me. Hungry and tired, I began to really sob. Salty tears stinging the tiny cuts on my face. I felt overwhelmed and sad. I looked up and noticed a woman standing nearby. I don't know how long she had been watching me, but I noticed her now. She had a kind, inquisitive face. I tried to pull myself together as she walked closer. She told me her name. Though I remember her face, her clothing, and our conversation almost verbatim, her name is curiously lost to me. She asked if I was okay, and just the way she said it opened up something in me. It was like permission to be honest, to take off my mask and cape, and to show her my true self. I began to cry. My body hurt. My feelings were hurt. In gulps of air, I spat out the story of our accident and the terrible feeling of being alone. She was so present to me. When I finished speaking, she hugged me and I remember thinking that I was ruining her coat with my tears. "How can I help?" she asked. This was just a simple question, and so hard to really answer. I voiced my needs to get them straight in my mind, not because I thought this woman would help me meet them. Why would she? I was a stranger, not a Canadian, but an African-American stranger in a strange land. I must have been a sight to behold. No one else approached me. No one else asked about me. Not even the nurses taking care of Paul had asked me about how I would survive until he was released from the hospital. But this woman did. Who was she? What was she doing right before she crossed my path? Was she there to visit someone? Was her beloved up in a room, suffering, healing? Was she an off-duty nurse? Or a physician? A social worker? I have no idea. She offered to let me stay at her house overnight and promised to drive me to the insurance company in the morning. I was both weary of and overwhelmed by her generosity, so she suggested she drive me to a hotel instead and come back for me in the morning. She would cover the hotel room, and I could pay her back. Her wild generosity only grew from there, and the details stay with me still today. She took me to the drugstore, where she bought me a toothbrush, toothpaste, and aspirin. She took me to McDonald's and bought me a hamburger, fries, and vanilla milkshake. She took me to the Quality Inn and paid the bill. She walked me to my room, watched as I opened the door, and hugged me in the doorway, waiting for me to lock myself in. She called through the closed door, "I hope you sleep, Jackie. It will be better tomorrow."
Unitarian Universalists have historically been known for our bumper stickers. So let me ask you, can anyone tell me the famous bumper sticker about Anonymous? If you know the answer, write it in the chat, shout it out, whatever you want to do. It goes something like this. For most of history, Anonymous was a woman. Capital A for Anonymous. The quotation is an adaptation of a line by writer Virginia Woolf. Now, too often, that woman shows up in dominant culture as a white woman, maybe because of Virginia Woolf. It took Sojourner Truth defiantly declaring, "Ain't I a woman?" to shatter the illusion that Anonymous is a specific identity. Who is Anonymous? Anonymous are those in our society who society tries to hide, seeks to silence. Anonymous are also those we have to thank for the freedoms and rights that we have today, because more often than not, they fought and died for them. If we want to know Anonymous, we have to seek out who is missing from our stories. Like the pious woman who led John Murray to Universalism, like the mothers and wives, the daughters and slaves of our founding fathers, like Black women who showed up at women's rights conventions uninvited, like, for instance, Bayard Rustin, kept in the shadows of the civil rights movement because he was gay, whose name is also only recently now known. The list goes on and on and on, Anonymous. Just compare the school history textbooks in California and Texas, books published by the same publisher and the same author. In California, they have the Fair Education Act, which requires schools to teach the contributions of lesbians, gay, bisexual, transgender, and disabled Americans. So in their textbooks, there are real people and their stories, and not just current people, people throughout time. In Texas, however, where there is not this legislation, the LGBTQ issues are taught as more recent events with people's names and stories left out of them. Put them side by side and you will find Anonymous. Whenever I'm in a racial justice training, inevitably the participants will lament, "Why didn't I ever learn about this?" Well, it's because Anonymous was legislated into our textbooks. In any circle, in any gathering, in any community, look for anonymous. They are often the people not at the table, not in the room, not mentioned in the stories, not leading the meeting or allowed to vote. They are also the people most impacted by the decisions that are made at that table. This is why we have an eighth principle, because it requires us to ask, who is not here? And who is most impacted by the decision we are about to make? I have to say, just as an example, that I often wonder why our children are often somewhere else on a Sunday morning. This sanctuary is most often the room where it happens on Sundays, and I wonder what it means that our children are so often not here. Is it left over from our cultural values that the best children are those who are out of sight and out of mind? What impact has it had on our faith that children are often not in worship? How would we have to change in order to worship together, in order to prioritize children's spiritual lives? Now, I'm not judging and saying that one is better than the other. I'm just curious. Who are we making anonymous? When the news broke this week on the leaked Supreme Court documents, I was not surprised. For years, people have been telling us that Roe versus Wade will be overturned. In the last 6 months, that drumbeat has gotten louder and louder. It's not a matter of if, they told us, it's a matter of when. They were not being alarmist. They were listening to all of the anonymous voices, real people, telling them their stories, saying, pay attention. This is happening to us right here, right now in our state. When has arrived. It was an intentional plan set decades ago. In the leaked draft, Judge Alito wrote, the inescapable conclusion is that the right to abortion is not deeply rooted in the nation's history and traditions. Comedian Trevor Noah rebuked Judge Alito's statement, arguing that 50 years is actually quite a long time for traditions to become rooted in a nation. Noah joked, if you go without electricity for a weekend, you are camping. If you go without electricity for 50 years, you are Amish. It is who you are. Anonymous has had the freedom to make their own decisions about their bodies for 50 years. Women, trans folks, black and brown, indigenous, abled and disabled, it's now a part of who we are. I mean, the powers that be have not made that freedom easy, but the freedom exists. It may be hard to believe, but our history has proven that it's difficult to have rational arguments with the court. Just look at how they have defined who is white and who is not. In the book White by Law, The Legal Construction of Race, Ian F. Haney Lopez shares the story of a Japanese man named Takao Ozawa. Ozawa petitioned for naturalized citizenship in 1922. Ozawa was anonymous. The Chief Justice at the time was William Howard Taft, a prominent Unitarian. Maybe this bodes well for this story. What do you think? No. The Supreme Court ruled unanimously against Ozawa, finding that Japanese were not white. They said that their decision was scientific because to be white was to be Caucasian, not Asiatic. Asians were not from the Caucasus Mountains. Now, another person came along, an Indian immigrant, Bhagat Singh Tin, was also an anonymous person who had been following Ozawa's case. And he reasoned that if white was to be a Caucasian, then he was a Caucasian, as Caucasians had originated in North India. Therefore, Tind must be white. But the Supreme Court, again, ruling unanimously, denied his petition. So what they said was, you may be Caucasian, but you are not white, because all whites are Caucasian, but not all Caucasians are white. You follow the logic, right? The inescapable conclusion is that crazy is indeed deeply rooted in this nation's history and traditions. I would like Judge Alito to put that into his case. I say it with no disrespect to all of us suffering from mental health. There are good reasons there's a mental health crisis here, because our country, bless its heart, was built on crazy. And so the logic of crazy has taken control of the control board, and it threatens to undermine the freedom for all of us who are not white. however white is defined, which could change at any moment. After all, the man leading the charge, or one of the men leading the charge, is orange. More seriously, it threatens to make all of us, a majority of us, anonymous. A majority of us anonymous. If we have the freedom to choose what happens to our own body, it will be the end of white patriarchy. And the system of white patriarchal dominance is fighting to take control. Now, I'm an average citizen without any semblance of a law degree. However, from my vantage point, it appears that Judge Alito and others want to take us back to our founding documents, back to what the founders intended, and there's no denying that our nation's founding was seated and firmly rooted in white patriarchy. Make America great again, make America white again, make America manly again, make America straight again. What are we returning to? They're about advantaging a select few and oppressing the masses. Not unlike the God that John Murray left behind in England, who allowed a select few into heaven and condemned the rest to hell. An audience member recently asked Trevor Noah, a South African, the difference between racism in America and racism in South Africa. And he said, it's much harder here in America because we have the same system, advantaging the few and oppressing the masses. But in South Africa, they called a spade a spade. They said, this is what we do, we advantage the few. In America, we call racism equality. Our country is founded upon crazy. So when our judges return to the founding documents, how will they take crazy into account? But here's the thing. Do you know what is also firmly rooted in the soil of America, in its history and traditions? Anonymous. And anonymous has not and will not go away. All week long, I've been holding in my heart stories of Anonymous, holding them alongside one another. The first that I'll lift up right now and put alongside the other is the story that Nicole shared with you about the Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis and her Canadian stranger. The second story is about a network of nearly 2,000 clergy and laity from New York to California across the country, who helped what is estimated to be 500,000 women and female-identified folks access safe abortions over a 6-year period from 1967 through 1973 when Roe legalized abortion. While a few of those clergy became well known for their efforts, most of them were anonymous. Now, I don't know about you, but if religion and abortion ever shared the page of my textbook during my growing up, or even in my seminary education, it was only in opposition to one another. How about you? These clergy, before reproductive freedom was legal, knew that it was a sacred decision to have a child, and it was a sacred decision to not have a child. Howard Moody, the senior minister of New York City's Judson Memorial Church, insisted that if clergy made themselves available to women, they would discover how great the need was and understand their obligation to address it. And so the clergy began their work by listening to Anonymous. Similarly, the Canadian stranger went to Reverend Dr. Jackie and asked, "How can I help?" Both the clergy and the Canadian stranger had the power, the resources, the connections to be of help, but they had to listen first. Moody declared that the first order of business was self-education, that sort of transformation. The founding members of what became the Clergy Consultation Services met with women who had illegal abortions to learn what the experience was like and what would have made it better. Both the clergy and the Canadian stranger had to go outside their comfort zones to provide help. Once the clergy launched their referral service, the members came to see themselves as both counselors and advocates. The organization created a kind of pre-internet Yelp for illicit abortion providers. When a physician willing to provide abortions was recommended, one of their staff would pose as a woman seeking an abortion to investigate the physician's office and their bedside manner and inquire about their technique. The counselors encouraged all women to report back about their experiences, and after a woman was referred to a new doctor, her counselor would follow up with her for her review. At one point, the referral service had enough significant market power that it leveraged to reduce the going rate for abortions. How is that for a transfer of power? Likewise, the Canadian didn't just give Jackie Lewis $100 and say good luck. After tending to her tears, her abrasions, and her empty stomach, the stranger walked Jackie all of the way to her hotel room door and made sure that she was safe. And then the stranger showed up again the next morning. If there is a path before us, beloved, on this day, on this week, in this time, it is to learn from these stories of Anonymous. We begin by listening to the Anonymous in our midst, knowing that often we are the Anonymous, to align ourselves with Anonymous, to call out the crazy, to understand our power, to cross boundaries and borders together, to show up again and again and again, because that is where the holy lives, not in the power of the few, but in the abundance of many. That is the spiritual center where we must live, because that is beloved community. The Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis said, on a September evening long ago when I was crashing about trying to find my way, I was graciously held by a stranger who crossed borders to save me. She was so very good to me. I didn't have to ask for it, perform for it, do penance for it. She showed up for me with no history, no demands. When I stared into a certain abyss, that stranger healed my hurt, comforted my grief, and loved me fiercely. She loved me all of the way home. So, beloved, today, let's love ourselves and the Anonymous among us and within us all of the way to a new America. Amen.
May the work I've done speak for me. May the work I've done speak for me. When I come to the end of this road and I lay down this heavy load, may the work I've done speak for me. Let the life I've lived speak for me. Let the life I've lived speak for me. When I come to the end of this road and I lay down this heavy load, let the life I've lived speak for me. Let the friends I've made speak for me. Let the friends I've made speak for me. When I come to the end of this road and I lay down this heavy load, let the friends I made speak for me.
Beloved, we live in such unprecedented times. Don't lose faith. As you leave this sanctuary, either in person or virtual, take with you the power of all of the anonymous forces, including your own, who are forever bending the moral arc of the universe. As long as we have breath in our lungs, take a deep breath with me. As long as we have a beat in our heart, put your hand on your heart. And as long as we have a fire in our belly, roar with me, okay? Roar! Did you do it? You have to do it. All right. As long as we have these, that arc, it bends towards justice. So may it be. Amen.